This video is a recording for the completion of Worksheet 12 for SGD113. I'm going to start demonstrating those different questions using the arrays. So let's take a look at the first question, question 1, where we are to declare an array named int array with 3 elements, add a unique number for each of the elements, and then display them in the question. So there's several ways we can handle this. I'm going to do it a couple of ways, and then you just decide which method is easier for you. So to declare an array, you have to show the difference between a regular integer or an array, and we do that by opening and closing the square brackets there. That lets C# know this is going to be an array of integers. Then we need to give it a name, just the way we were declaring before, our variables, data type, and then a name. And then I can assign those 3 elements using the curly braces here. I could provide 3 elements, 8, 5, and 2, for example. That's one way you can declare an array and assign 3 elements to it with a specific value. Next, I just need to display that in the question text. So question 1 text.text. And I can just use int array. I can specify the first element, so that will be the one at position 0. And then I'm going to put a comma and a space in between each. Int array at position 1. And then I could put a comma and a space. And then the last element, when I have 3 of them, so their indices are going to be 0, 1, and 2, which makes sense because we start counting at 0. And maybe I'll have a period to close it. Notice that when I put numbers in the text and then I concatenate that with strings, I have no issues. I don't need to do a 2-string kind of thing. So that should display 8, 5, and 2 in my question. I'm going to save my worksheet. Take a look at the editor. There it goes. And when I press play, if I click on question 1, I see 8, 5, and 2 being displayed there. So that's one way you can declare your array and initialize it with specific values. I can define it in a different way, and I'm going to show you this just for educational purposes. So I declare again an int array. But this time I'm not assigning any values. I just define it as an array of integers. And then here in between the square brackets, I do have to specify a size. How many elements do I want in this array? And in my example here, I need 3 of them. Then I can assign the values individually. So I can use int array at position 0 and give it a value. And then int array at position 1. And then I can assign to it a value. And the last element at position 2, and I can assign a value 15. There he goes. Should have picked 27. Anyway, so if I were to test this out, it would give me the exact same results, well, with different numbers because I assigned different values here. But I should get my 3, 9, and 15 values that I've initialized there. So it works just the same way. You can choose whichever way. Now here is a little note that is not part of the assignment or the worksheet, but if I were to try to assign value 3 here and say assign 14 to it, well, I guess I could do 13 because it's lucky number 13. I'm going to break my code. Here, obviously, I only have 3 elements in the array, so with 3, I'm going out of the range, but I don't get any red squiggly lines. Means no compile time errors. C# is okay with this because it's not identifying or it's not able to determine that 3 is out of range. But when I run the code in Unity and I click on question 1, I get an index out of range exception. Index was outside the bounds of the array, and if I look, line 33 is the line that broke my code, and when I look at line 33 here, I can see that's when I tried to reach position 3 in the array. So that is a very useful information to know here. It's quite a common mistake to go out of range on these arrays. So make sure you're familiar with the type of error, index out of range exception. Let's now work on question 2, where we are declaring an int array again with 10 elements, but this time we're going to assign unique numbers to those elements using a for loop. So we're declaring an array of integers. This is how we do this. We assign a name to it, int array, and then we don't have any values because we have to assign those in the for loop, but we do have to specify the size, which will be 10. Then we have to use a for loop to initialize those elements. Now, because it's an array of integers, the initial values that C# is going to assign to those elements are going to be zeros. We never want to let C# initialize our values for us. We want to do that ourselves to avoid potential bugs, especially if you are building a game that could lead to terrible errors. So let's initialize our array using a for loop. I'm going to start at position 0, and I needs to be less than, I guess it needs to be less than 10, but I have a property of the array that can help me determine how many elements I have. This way, if I were to change later on this value here, my for loop would still work. So I'm going to use int array dot length, and that gives me the number of elements in the array, which is really helpful. And then I need to increment my array. So here I just need to assign a value, a specific value. I'm just going to use a random number. Why not? So int array at position I, and then I'm going to use random dot range, and I'm going to assign values between 1 and 30. Why 30? Why not? Okay, so that's great. Next, I need to display all of the elements in that array into the question 2 text. So I could go through the painful process of initializing the question 2 text by doing the same thing I did for the first question, but it's 10 elements. That's kind of like more work. So here I'm going to create instead a message string, and I'm going to set it to the empty string to get started. Every time I'm going to increment the message with the new element, which is int array at position I. I just define its value there. Plus, I'm going to put a comma and a space. There it goes. And then after that, I can display that message in my question 2 text. That makes my life a little bit easier. There we go. I can save this and run it to see if it works as expected. So I should get 10 random values between 1 and 30 in the question 2 text. Let's get back to the editor and test this out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 values are being provided. It kind of works as expected. If I were to, I should not have stopped running. Click on the button multiple times. I should get different values each time. And it works as expected. Let's now work on question 3, where we are to declare an array of integers called int array with 20 elements, and then display the total number of elements in the question 3 text without using hard-coded values, just using the properties of the array. So here we don't even need to initialize the values of the array. So I declare my integer array, and I name it int array, and I'm going to specify that it has 20 elements. You do have to specify the number of elements you're going to have in the code. I could do it this way, or I could assign values to it. It's not really required. And then here in the question 3 text, I'm going to display the number of elements here. So the array has, and then, so if you remember from the previous question, int array dot length will give me how many elements I have in it. Let's not forget that semicolon at the end of the statement. So that should work as expected. Let's test it out in the editor. If I click on question 3, the array has 20 elements, which is what I was expecting. I could also define my array in a different manner, kind of like what I did in the first question. One element, 2 elements, 3 elements, 4 elements, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13, 14. Yeah, having some troubles. I think that's it. Let's double check. Well, one way to find out if I have defined 20 or not is to check if it works in the question. I clicked the wrong question. The array has 20 elements. Apologies for that. For question 4, we are to display to the question 4 text the number that represents the first element in an array. So that's the index of the first element in the array, and that would be 0. So all we have to do here, we don't need to define an array. We just need to display that information here. The first element in an array is at position, and an index is the proper term, 0. So I can run this quickly. This time it's question 4. I'll make sure I click the correct one. Well, apparently it's not working, so I need to check that my button is actually connected. Let me stop playing the game here, or running the application, and I notice actually my button is disconnected. So I can just put back the UI controller here and reconnect it to question 4. Maybe yours is still connected, I don't know. Mine is no longer connected. Let's try it. There it goes. Actually, I ran out of space, so maybe I'm going to shorten up my text. I'm going to use first like this, element is at position 0 because that's what I'm really interested in. Let's make sure that actually I can see my response in the user interface for question 4. There it goes. That works. Let's move on to the next question. Here it goes. What runtime error you get in the console if you try to access an element that doesn't exist? So we've taken a look at this one. Let's do it again so that we can see it. I'm going to declare an array with 2 elements, and I'm going to try to access a position that doesn't exist, like position 5, and assign a value to it. Now let's run it so we can see for ourselves what the error is. You should have read your documentation and your textbooks, and that would have given you that information. I did not check if I was actually connected here for my question 5. Let's reselect. I'm not connected again, so I'm gonna fix quickly the buttons to make sure that I don't have any surprise. Question 5 is connected now. Question 6 is still connected, and question 7 is connected. Well, it's only a couple of questions. So if I were to actually run again and try question 5, here it is, index out of range exception. So Let's go back to our worksheet and display that information. I can comment out the code that gave me the error just to help me out here, but more to show you exactly what happened. And then update the text of question 5 and index out of range exception occurs. Let's save it. I guess we could test it and make sure that it displays the information. If I click on my question 5 button, I get the correct information displayed here for question 5. Now let's move on to question 6, where we are to declare an integer array. Well, let's start with that. And it has 10 elements. So that's a relatively simple task. So we've done it multiple times. Now we're going to use a for loop to initialize the elements in the array. So we can set that up as we have done before. I needs to be less than the array's length. And then we can increment here for each loop. Then we are initializing the element at that current position. So int array at I, and assign a value to it. I'm going to pick random.range and pick a value between, let's pick between 1 and 10. So I have to use 11 for the upper limit. So that defines my array. Then I have to use a for each loop to find the sum of all of those elements. So to calculate the sum, we've done that before with for loops. I'm going to define a sum variable that I'm going to set to 0 originally. I'm also going to set up a message there as well, so for displaying the output, because in the end I need to display all of the elements in the array into the question 6 text. So I'm going to set that up here as well. The way we set up a for each loop is relatively simple. We use the for each keyword, open the parenthesis, then I need to declare a temporary variable for the current element. So it's going to be an integer because it's an array of integers, and I'm going to call it element maybe. And then I need to specify the name of the array. So int array here, that's pretty simple. There we go. So element is going to be the first element in the array, and then the second, and then the third, and it keeps on going till the end of the array there. So I can do sum plus equal the element. I don't really know what index I'm at this time, but I'm going to take whatever is element is going to be added up to the sum. And then I'm going to also add that to my message. Maybe I'm going to put a plus symbol in between to separate them. All right, and then in the end, when my for each loop is done, it's gone through all of the elements in the array. I can take a moment and try to display that in the question 6 text. .text, and then I can assign the message here, and then maybe I'm going to display, just for curiosity, the sum. It's not going to look that great because I'm going to have an extra plus sign there, and I could fix that. I'm just not too worried about it. So I can save this and try my question 6. I'll make sure it displays the 10 elements and also displays the sum. 2 plus 8 plus 10 plus 8 plus 3 plus 2 plus 7 plus 9 plus 7 plus 3 equals 59. That seems relatively reasonable because I have the set and 3. Yep. That looks pretty good. All right, so one more question, question number 7. Here is question number 7. So we are going to declare an array, again with 10 elements, and we're going to try to assign those values to the elements using a for each loop. And then we're going to have to explain what happened in question 7 text. So let's do that quickly. We are experts now at declaring arrays. and specifying a size for those arrays. That's pretty simple. Now we are going to assign values using a for each loop. So in the for each loop, I need to have a variable to store the current element, and I give it a name. And then I specify in which array I'm trying to loop through. So here it says we need to try to fill each element with a unique number in there. So the only way I have access to the element in the array is using that element temporary word. And maybe let's try to do a random dot range 1 through 11 again. It doesn't really matter. All right, and I notice here that I get a red squiggly line right away. So that tells me compile time error. This is not a runtime error. This is a compile time error. And then it tells me cannot assign to element because it's a for each iteration variable. So let's kind of write out cannot assign to element because it's a for each. So that's just so I can keep track of the error that I'm getting here. It's a compile time error, and I can't not assign that because it's a for each iteration variable. What you need to remember when you're using for each loop is that they are great for reading the elements in an array, but you cannot assign values to them. You would have to go back to a regular for loop and using the index notation to be able to access the elements in the array. So a for each loop is read-only, basically. That's what you need to kind of remember about it. So of course we're going to need to comment out that code if we want to run it. And then we're going to display what we have observed, what error we have noticed there. We get a compile time error. Cannot assign to element because it's a for each iteration variable. I guess I can try to make my screen a little bit smaller so you get to see. And I need a semicolon at the end of my statement here. There it goes. I've commented out the code. It's still going to loop through each element, but not going to do anything here. And then it should display my text in the user interface. So let's try and click on question 7. We get a compile time error, cannot assign to element because it's a for each iteration variable. There it goes. This concludes worksheet 7. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a fun day.